Hello everybody, this is Kelly Nemick and this is my presentation on authentic leadership. What is authentic leadership? So, first of all, authentic leadership is a process. It is something that does not happen overnight, so it definitely takes time to form, but ultimately it is a process that draws from both positive psychological capacities and a highly developed organizational context, which really fits in with what we studied over this session. It also results in greater self-awareness and self-regulated positive behaviors on the part of leaders and associates. So, something just to be aware of is that self-awareness is something that is a reoccurring theme within authentic leadership, which is really great because it really just helps the followers understand more where the leader is coming from, but also the self-awareness helps the leader understand the followers as well. And additionally, authentic leadership fosters an internalized moral perspective, balanced processing of information, and relational transparency on the part of leaders working with followers. And those three things are something that will be touched on later in the presentation. So now we're going to talk a little bit about who an authentic leader is. So first of all, an authentic leader is confident, hopeful, resilient, and of high moral character. Authentic leaders are also very understanding, and they're not only understanding of themselves, but they're also understanding of how they think and behave. And that's super important because the way they think and behave is represented to the followers, and the followers really do look up to their leader, so that's definitely really, really important. They also possess self-awareness, and they use this knowledge to learn from themselves and to develop their followers. And again, self-awareness is so important in authentic leadership and definitely a reoccurring theme. And they also have a deep sense of purpose for their leadership. Authentic leaders are definitely very passionate about what they do, and their values that they have really are represented in their leadership and something that's represented to their followers as well. And then the last thing we have is that authentic leaders do not define themselves as authentic. So ultimately, the followers or whoever has received the leadership of an authentic leader is the one who says that they are authentic. They themselves cannot say, I am an authentic leader. Now, in regards to organizational leadership, a lot of us are very familiar with the human resource frame, and that is the one I'm going to be talking about within authentic leadership. Now, I picked the human resource frame because what Bowman and Deal tell us is that people were the most important asset, and that's exactly how authentic leadership is. Authentic leadership really looks at developing followers and really looks at pursuing individuals rather than just looking at the organization as a whole. They look at the organization through the people in it. Now, in the human resource frame, we see a little bit about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And most of us are very familiar with what this is. So we're going to look a little bit at the chart on the right. So you're going to start with basic needs. So that's the physiological needs and the safety needs, things that we definitely need to survive. After that, we're going to move up a little bit to the psychological needs, and that's the feeling the sense of belonging and love from your intimate relationships and your friends. Your esteem needs is feeling the sense of accomplishment and that you're valued. After you reach that, you get up to the self-fulfillment or self-actualization. And what self-actualization is once you get there, you have developed to your fullest potential. And that's exactly what authentic leadership teaches us. Uh, there's a lot of research out there on employee trust and engagement in the workplace, and this is something that's just really important is when supervisors are consistent with their words and actions, so They say one thing and they definitely act on that. They're not just saying one thing and acting a different way. The employees are definitely more likely to remain engaged in their work. So they're going to work harder knowing that they have a supervisor they can trust, and because of that trust, they can ultimately just perform to their best potential, and that's where they've met that self-actualization. So again, an employee would have their basic needs, and then in that psychological needs, they would get that from their supervisor, which ultimately would raise them up to that self-fulfillment. So that's kind of how authentic leadership would fit into Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Now, within organizational leadership and the human resource frame, we're going to talk a little bit about the investing in people approach. That's definitely something authentic leadership is all about. In that investing in people approach, they really focus on treating others how you would want to be treated. So a supervisor is obviously going to respect his or her employees because ultimately that's how they would want to be treated in return. So that's what authentic leaders really focus on. They really focus on supporting their employees and just building a trusting relationship, which ultimately would just really build a safe environment for people to be open and ask questions and just build on that trust so that ultimately they would be those ultimately end up being their best employees, and research has supported that observation. Now we're going to focus on change in authentic leadership, and specifically we're just going to focus on followers because that is definitely the most important change that can come from authentic leadership. They really focus on developing followers who can ultimately become leaders. So first we're going to talk about how authentic leaders have a very deep awareness of others. They really can focus on their followers and kind of how they process things, how they think, how they work. Because they're so self-aware, they are also others aware, and they really have that emotional intelligence we talked a little bit about in class. They really are aware of their own needs, but also the needs of others. And authentic leaders also influence thinking, motivation, and choice of behaviors in their followers. And the way they do this is through that balanced processing, internal moral perspective, and relational transparency. And we talked about that a little bit at the beginning, but now we're going to go a little bit more in detail just so we can better understand how authentic leaders can influence those followers. So first is through the balanced processing. So this allows authentic leaders to practice like relatively unbiased information, and then they're processing that from a rather holistic perspective. And then with that internal moral perspective, that this is guiding the leaders to insist on upholding the moral values and behave in a pro-social and ethical manner in the face of adversity and conflict. So like we said before, the moral values are so important to authentic leaders, so it's really, really cool that they're upholding those values, and ultimately even in the face of adversity and conflict. And then the last part of that is relational transparency. And this one I would say is definitely the most important when it comes to authentic leaders. And relational transparency refers to the leader behaviors and sharing information by creating an honest, open, and trustful exchange with their followers. So, authentic leaders are really focusing on building that safe environment and safe relationship. They're trying to make it honest, open, and full of trust, and that's what is so admirable about authentic leadership is how they're really looking to serve their followers, not rather just kind of like be a dictator over them, but they're really looking to serve and develop personally, but also professionally. And then just in the realm of higher education, this is really, really important. And I really enjoyed researching this part because I'm so passionate about higher ed and kind of what authentic leadership is about. So, first, authentic leadership really focuses on employee trust and engagement. And researchers have found that when followers were treated fairly and with concern by their leader, they're more likely to reciprocate. So this goes back to the human resource frame, saying, I want to be treated how I would want to treat people how I would want to be treated. And so that kind of goes back to that. And again, stated this again earlier, but when employees perceive their supervisors as being consistent with their words and their actions and holding up those perceptions, they're more likely to be engaged in their work. So it really comes back to how the supervisor is treating the followers. And that's why authentic leadership is really, really important. And then talking about employee innovation, researchers have found that through their process that authentic leadership relates strongly to employee emotions. And the researchers defined emotions as conscious or unconscious multi-component responses that evolved and manifested over a relatively short period of time. So the self-awareness enabled that authentic leader to better understand the followers' strengths, weaknesses, and emotions. So because of the leader understanding those, they stated that positive emotions expanded the individual's thought action repertoires and the employees, and so that when employees with highly positive emotions were more likely to put forward new ideas and develop thinking and acting patterns necessary for idea implementation. So being surrounded by a supportive work climate and just like a safe one that authentic leaders were promoting, employees were more likely to feel positive, broaden their thinking, um, feel increased interest in their work. So the employee innovation was also a really, really big part of authentic leadership. And then just to conclude, the human resource frame really fits in with authentic leadership, and also authentic leadership as a whole, as we've seen through all of this, they're very self-aware, but they're always also very people-focused. They're really focusing on how can I support this follower? How can I support my teammate? How can I just pursue them so that they can ultimately become a leader? So they're leaders who are reproducing leaders. And so that's something that's really encouraging and definitely something that can be put into higher education. And I think employee trust, engagement, and employee innovation is something that can be put into higher education, because if you're just focusing on the organization and not on your team, you're not going to build that emotional trust and engagement or innovation. So really focusing on the people first and then the organization can really build that, and just putting those, also supporting your people and supporting the organization together will bring a better climate within higher education. So thank you for listening, and I hope you guys learned something, and if you have any questions, feel free to comment.